First of all, I want to thank you all for giving me a few minutes of your time. Now, in the time that's been allotted to me, I only have but one question. It's only three small words, this question, but three small words that need to be heard and answered. What about those? What about those people? The ones that were shackled like dogs, brought up here on slave ships, put on the auction block, and sold to the highest bidder. What about those? Those people, the ones whose names we'll never know, the ones who were thought to be and treated as though they were subhuman, but refused to let it be so. What about those? Certain times of the year we celebrate our heroes, Malcolm and Martin, Medgar Evers and others. But what about our grandfathers, grandmothers, their sisters and their brothers? What about those? What about those people? The ones who, after careful consideration, decided it would be an honor to put their lives on the line at the Edmund Pettus Bridge at the hands of a man named Bull Connor. What about those? What about 15-year-old Claudette Colvin, who was arrested because she wouldn't give up her seat on a segregated bus? Yeah, a full 9 months before Miss Parks. But you see, her memory's been forgotten, forever lost in the dark. What about those? What about Joseph McNair, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair, and David Richmond, also known as the Greensboro Four? Four college-educated black men who refused to give up their seats at the Woolworth lunch counter. Four college-educated black men who were determined to spark change in spite of all their doubters. What about those? What about our fellow brothers in Haiti, who sparked one of the most successful slave revolts in history, completely driving out their enslavers? But you see, for their unwavering bravery and their willingness to die, they've never received any favors. What about those? What about Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who took a dream and an art and turned it into something that has now become commonplace to cure those who suffer from a failing heart? What about those? Yeah. And we've all heard the story, about Paul Revere and his famous ride. But what about the first black judge in U.S. history, Wentworth Cheswell, who rode along beside him and said, "You go west, and I'll ride along the northern side"? What about those? What about those people, those unknown people, the ones who were beaten with axe handles, sticks, and bats? Yeah, those people, the ones who had fire hoses turned on them as if they were a bunch of sewer rats. Also that a certain demographic could have what they all considered to be a reason to gloat. But you see, to those people it meant more. It meant that my generation and every generation after would have the right to vote. What about those? What about those people? Those unknown people. The ones who walked for blocks and blocks and miles until their feet were blistered and bleeding, rather than to just simply take the bus. Yeah, those people. The ones who knew that somehow, some way, their actions someday would make things better for us. What about those? What about Sarah Rector, who at the tender age of 11 in the year 1913 became the wealthiest black woman this country had ever seen? Because you see, look, check this out, this is funny. Her 160-acre inheritance of barren, unfarmable land led forth a gusher, giving her today's equivalent of $10,000 a day. But a black woman with that kind of wealth, well, let's just say she faced some troubles that caused her to have to move away. But see, it should make you ask yourself the question, what about those? See, because she moved her family from Oklahoma to Kansas City, but no one ever talks about her. What a pity. But you see, again, it should make you ask yourself the question, what about those? What about Alice H. Parker, who made it possible for us to not have to gather on the fire? Because you see, because of Miss Parker, we all have the ability to adjust our heating to our own desire. What about those? What about Jesse Binga or Miss Maggie L. Walker, of whom too many black Americans served as anchors? Because you see, Mr. Binga and Miss Walker were this country's first black-owned bankers. What about those? And then, what about those people, those unknown people in the Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, also known as Black Wall Street? Because you see, in 1921, they faced the ultimate defeat. For 35 square blocks, they were murdered. Yeah, their homes and businesses pillaged and burned, all because a certain demographic had become jealous over everything they'd earned. What about those? And what about those people, those unknown faceless people in Rosewood, Florida, the first full week of 1923? Caught off guard, never had a chance to flee. They were ambushed, never had a chance to hide. To this very day, they're still not sure just how many people died. But you see, a certain demographic wanted them all to die. Wanted them all to die over one big lie. What about those? You see, when I was first writing this piece, I was told to be careful with the words that I chose. But it still hasn't changed my question. What about those? Those people, the ones who had unshakable faith in the risen Christ. So much so, they were willing to pay the ultimate price. Yeah, those people. So many unknown people. The ones who were treated like Christmas ornaments and hung from the trees. In the words of the great Miss Billie Holiday, strange fruit, blood at the roots and blood on the leaves. And you see, they didn't even really want much. Not really. They just wanted to be equal. They just wanted to be free. So the next time you're hanging out with your sisters and your bros, do them a favor. Make them think a little bit and ask them the question, what about those? Will we ever get answer to that question? God only knows. But until we do, let's just keep asking that question. What about those? Thank you again for your time.